Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Vinh and Ali podcast. This particular episode, we're going to be talking about a book from Seth Godin. Seth Godin's an amazing marketer. He's got many brilliant books, which I'm sure we'll be able to cover in future episodes. But this particular one is the classic, The Purple Cow. Ali, welcome to our podcast, and thanks for joining me as always.
Oh, thank you, Vin. The Purple Cow. You remind me of a purple cow.
Of course I do. No, I mean, I would say that the story that made this book was right at the start when Seth Godin was talking about how him and his family would always take this trip and they would drive through these fields of cows, and he would say that there'd be hundreds of cows and he wouldn't really notice the cows at all until he thought one day, imagine there was a purple cow. That purple cow would stand out like nothing else, right? And I think I used to stand out like a purple cow because I literally at one point had purple hair. But the idea of a purple cow, I think, is really interesting. And even though this book was written years ago, I think there are so many relevant points that still apply today.
Yeah, for sure. And I just love it. Like, even on here, the subline is, it's obviously a business book. It's a marketing book, just for context, for people that don't know Seth Godin's work. And I think a lot of people probably regard him as one of the godfathers of marketing. I know this book especially gets recommended by a lot of people when they're starting out in business as a bit of a marketing and product development type of handbook. And yeah, for me, I read this book the first time maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, relatively early in my entrepreneurial journey. And it was awesome rereading it again and then actually just seeing how much of an impact this book had on a lot of our decisions. So I'm pretty excited to dig into that throughout this episode. But I guess the overarching concept is about, standing out and being remarkable, right?
Well, let's start on that point, because this is a book I've recently reread again with you for this podcast. And something that I didn't get at all from the first time of reading this book is the following point, where Seth Godin says that remarkable has nothing to do with quality. That kind of broke my brain a little bit, because to me, I always have associated remarkable with quality. I thought that for something to be absolutely remarkable, it has to be of the highest quality ever. That's not the case when it comes to remarkable from the standpoint of the purple cow, because what Seth Godin talks about is that, that let's say that being remarkable, there's many factors that make something remarkable, but this book isn't speaking to the point of highest quality. This book is speaking to the most unique. That's like another lever for you to be able to turn and play with when you want to be remarkable. So that, I didn't get that the first time at all. I mean, did you get that? I mean, I didn't get that at all.
Little bits, but then I also think that he uses the example that you can have shock value, but probably if it's not backed by quality, it's going to be very fleeting, right? Yeah. Like you can use, like we see it all the time, like shock jocks or reality TV stars that have 5 minutes of fame for doing something outrageous, but the shelf life probably isn't that long. So I think you can be remarkable and unique superficially, and then you can be remarkable with a little bit more depth. And they're both very interesting.
How many other aspects to remarkable do you think exists? So one is quality of product. Two is definitely how unique it is. Yeah. What other factors do you think make up remarkable?
I think the biggest point, the biggest one that I wrote down here is, for something to be remarkable, it's something that's worth talking about. And it's also something that people are wanting and willing to share. Like, to me, that is one of the biggest tick points. And that's something that I highlighted a lot throughout the rereading of this book. It was doing an inventory of that. It's like, all right, well, what's in the ecosystem that's actually worth talking about, that gets people excited, that they want to then share with their friends? And if you get that happening, I think that core level of remarkability exists.
So what you're saying is how easily it can spread, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so that's
coronavirus. Very remarkable.
Yeah, I guess it's remarkable in a way that I guess a negative remarkable. Oh man.
Yeah.
But I mean, okay, so that's another angle. Can you think of any others? I mean, I want to try to push ourselves here,
Oof.
more specifically you, but it's
Yeah.
how easily it can spread. The second thing
Yeah.
is, how unique it is, and the third thing is high quality. Is there anything else that makes something remarkable? I mean, if you think about some of the greatest brands, for example, like Apple,
Mm.
what makes them remarkable?
I think also how quickly you can connect with the early adopter, right? Especially with innovations and new technologies. Is like if you look at Apple, for example, so much of their brand was built on turning technology towards like the artists and the crazy ones and the creative thinkers, right? They were, at that point, they were a pretty small subset of the PC market or the computer market, but they invested into that area of making tech cool, I guess. And then back that would be the strategy to keep going. And I think that's the other beautiful thing about Remarkability is that it's so unpredictable. It's like trying to create a viral video. You never know why or when it's going to stick, but if you do catch on to something that is remarkable, it can become a very special thing.
Yeah.
What else? Do you have any? Do you have any that stick out?
No.
Well, here's. I was thinking about you a lot when I was reading this book and I was also thinking about like one of the big things that I did, and maybe this is something that the listeners can do throughout this episode too, is think back throughout your life and what were the moments that were actually remarkable, and how many can you list and name? Either where you did something remarkable, where you were involved with something remarkable happened to you. Because just this whole concept of remarkability has been just running through my head heaps after reading this book. Like even with the team, I've been just sharing so much stuff. I'm like, well, is that remarkable? Is this remarkable? I'm going to annoy them so badly now with this, at least for the next week or two while it's fresh in my mind. But I don't know, there's magic magic is remarkable, right?
I think it's a form of remarkable. It's remarkable because it surprises you. And you just given me an idea, right? Remarkable has to surprise you. That's another part of the definition I feel is applicable. Because when it doesn't surprise you or astonish you, then it's not remarkable, is it? Or maybe remarkable, again, you don't have to fulfill 100% of its definition. Maybe when you hit 80%, then it is already remarkable. These are just an extra lever for remarkable. So that's what makes magic remarkable to me, is that it's surprising, it's unexpected. You're astonished by it. And just what you asked me before, thinking back to my experiences, personally for me, the most remarkable thing that I experience is the connection that I get when I run my in-person workshops. That's something that, and I'm not saying for the students, I'm saying this is for me personally as the teacher. I find that a remarkable experience, because when I have very deep connections with people, I find that to be the best thing ever. I find that even more rewarding than, when you're on stage and you get a standing ovation, for example, as a speaker. I find it more rewarding being deeply connected with someone.
Yeah, that's cool.
And look, I guess in order for you to tell your team about remarkability, you have to be able to really define it, right? I think that's what's really important here, because the book goes into talking about being remarkable and how being boring is not good. But you have to really be able to get a general sense of what remarkable means. Otherwise, you're not aiming at a target. You're talking about this thing that's, elusive. It's not very clear. See, that's why I wanted to bring that question up first. It's what is it?
And my sentence, and I don't know whether this is the correct definition or not, my sentence was simply, does this wow the user, and will they want to talk about it?
There you go. I think you've distilled it down quite well.
That was as close as I could get, because and there's a difference as well, especially in the business sense, right? Because there's call it foundational things that you just have to do. That's a really core part of the offering or the service that you're providing. But then I also think that one of the things that can get lost at times is when you're focusing so much on optimizing the core and the foundations that was, that is your current version of what's potentially remarkable. You can lose sight of then creating new things that are also then remarkable. And I think that's the challenge that so many people face. Even if you look at it like in terms of relationships, where there's so many more remarkable moments early on, and you use all your remarkability, and then generally it plateaus a little bit over time, right? It's probably the same with business. It's the same with starting a new job. At the beginning, you're just trying to impress everyone. You're being remarkable. Then 2 years in, it's like, oh yeah, I'll just go through the motions. I'll call it in. So I think it's also then cashing in on that remarkability where you can, but then that's the other bit that I'd love to explore in this episode is how do you
sustain it?
How do you sustain being remarkable, and how do you keep having a go at being remarkable? Because even from a professional standpoint, if you think about getting a job, like I was thinking about this too, and I was thinking about, all the people that I've employed or hired or worked with, or even when I've applied for jobs previously, when a really good result was achieved, something remarkable happened at some point. Like even when I think back to my top team members, like they did something that was remarkable that made them a top team member, whether it was having a certain skill set or a certain result that they created or a certain network that they developed, experience, whatever it is. But I think that so many of us, we fall into the trap of just doing it the same way that everyone else does it. Like even when you think about applying for a job, like the majority of people do the cover letter, send in the resume, it gets lost in a pile of 100. But very few actually go that extra step. It might only be one extra step, like 5%, where they do a bit more additional research, or they actually start a project and display their value, or they offer to volunteer prior to the interview starting. Like there's all these little tools that don't take that much of an investment, but can result into such a remarkable outcome, which might be getting your dream job or getting that promotion. But I'd say 90% of people just go through the motions.
I ran a session for the University of Adelaide for graduates who are looking for jobs, and one of the ideas I shared with them that worked for quite a few of them was if you're handing in a printed kind of CV letter or resume, make sure it's in a different colored folder than the generic colors that you can get from Officeworks. That's one way, and then the second way I told them is to, instead of having a cover letter, do a cover video and then kind of scan a QR code. So they can just take their phone and scan it, and it's a video of you addressing the person. And if you know their name, that's even more powerful, right? Because you can say, "Hey, Ali, thanks for taking the time to review my resume." It's just little things you can do to stand out. And like you said, it doesn't have to be crazy dramatic. It can just be a little 5% point of difference.
Well, what I know you're a master of these little moves. Can you think of one that you've used? It might not be applying for a job or something, just where you added a bit of remarkability to it.
Well, I mean, I was, while reading this, I realized how unremarkable my online course was. Because when I was producing my online course, the key thing that I was focused on was the quality of the teaching and the quality of the videos. And I was so focused on quality that I lost track of the uniqueness of it. It's funny because we often can't do many things at once. We can only do one thing at once. And reading this made me realize, damn, I need to introduce an element that will make people talk about it. I need to introduce an element that will make people spread it, right? And I wrote down a bunch of ideas. And one of the ideas that I wrote was most online courses are just about the dispensing of the knowledge. So people are just sharing ideas with you. It lacks the application side, and that's what my online course currently lacks. So I wrote down a whole bunch of ideas on how I can create challenges for people to actually apply the things that they've learned. So I've got a bunch of revisions now to go and film later this week to be able to add to the online course so that people can take the lessons they've learned and now apply it in a way that's fun. That's something I've got for my in-person workshops. That's something I've got for my virtual live workshops, but it's something I didn't have for my online course. So to me, the part that's this book really brought to light was how unique is what you're doing? How unique is it? Whether it's approach to finding a job, whether it's you selling an online course, whether it's you as a speaker, you selling a product, you selling a service, how unique is it? How often do we even ask ourselves that question with the things that we're doing? How often do we ask this, Ali, us doing this podcast? How unique is this podcast, right? I think these are things, that's a question that's often missing when people are starting businesses or starting hobby ventures or whatever. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, asking that.
Super interesting.
Yeah, it makes you put on a different lens.
Also, the idea of when you're late to the game, how much more unique you then have to be. Yeah, because one of the things that I wrote down is that if your problem's already being solved, you really just can't go in there with a very similar solution. Even if you polish it up differently or you package it up slightly differently or you have, a little bit of different pricing, you might get a little bit off that market or the market share, but it has to be so uniquely different if you're coming late to the party. And that's just such a rule that you see, that the first mover has such a big advantage. And the importance of just really defining your positioning and what value you're actually going to provide. Because that's the thing, even I think when we're looking at this podcast, for example, is we've probably got benefits there. It's like, okay, well, we're not the first people to do a podcast. I'm guessing we're probably not the first people to do a podcast on books, but are we maybe the first multicultural Australian entrepreneur, keynote speaker,
golf enthusiast,
archer enthusiast? Then we might be able to define the market there, and then you can then start designing that product or offering specifically for the audience that's then interested in that, right? But I think positioning and, it's in business, it's a pretty overused term, but defining your value proposition is such a big thing. And defining your value proposition, that probably exists in everything. It's not just in business, it's in life, where the importance of actually knowing your strengths or where your value sits or where your uniqueness sits will probably help you with separating yourself and standing out a little bit more, if that's your intention.
Yeah, well, I think what this book highlights is that doing what everyone else is doing or being average is way riskier than doing something that's risky, right? I think the book really highlights that being a black and white cow is the fastest way to destroy your business. Average is the path to failure. In the world we live in today, everything is so noisy now that if you're ordinary, you're invisible. These are lots of little quotes from the book that I remember reading it at the time. Again, same with you, 5-6 years ago when I first read it. I didn't fully grasp how noisy the world was. I mean, the world was already noisy 5 or 6 years ago, and 5 or 6 years on, it's even noisier now. And what's interesting is I'm so good now, I think, as well as 99% of the world, we're so good at ignoring ads. How fast do we click that skip ad button? We literally, the moment an ad comes on TV, you go to your phone. The moment an ad comes onto your phone, you switch to a different app. We're so quick to just ignore ads. So to me, one of the biggest.
And how violated do you feel when you can't skip the ad?
Well, how violated do you feel when you're paying for a service like Spotify? I mean, I pay for Spotify and I still get ads recently. I feel fully violated in that sense. I just couldn't believe they're still playing me ads. So not only are we good at ignoring ads, we get offended when an ad comes on. That's crazy.
And it's so hypocritical because I literally cannot get offended by ads because of how many ads I've run over the last 7 years. It would be wrong, but it's like, even I remember this screen that I've got in my background. It's a Samsung TV, so we'll call out Samsung slightly here.
But I've got one as well that I forgot to turn on. But yeah.
On on the bottom of the home bar, Samsung have an ad there that you just cannot disable. Like there's literally no way to get rid of the ad. Yeah. And that's crazy. Like on a TV that happens.
There is.
Yeah. It's got an ad there and it's insane. But I think that we'll probably see that shifting just with marketing and advertising. Like even now when you look at, somebody was telling me the other day, there's some browser. It's essentially a Chrome browser, but it's linked to cryptocurrency, and you can go on that browser and then you can select whether you want ads or not. But if ads are then served to you, you get paid for being served those ads in that cryptocurrency. And I'm like, that's where it starts getting pretty interesting now that, you know, given that we are shoved so many ads, and the data is so valuable, there's probably a way that the consumer will hopefully start benefiting too from being forced to endure ads.
I guess that kind of dives into the first point of the book, right? And it's the whole concept of how mass marketing is losing its power because it's so abundant. And I thought that was really interesting because the whole principle behind that is that anything that is in abundance loses its effectiveness, loses its power. And I thought, what else is something in life that the more you have more of it, it loses its power? And the first thing that came to my mind was money.
Yeah.
That's why they say money is something that has diminishing returns, right? You get to a certain point, once you have a certain amount of it, the returns are diminishing. And, you know, there's that common quote where it says, people know that money doesn't bring you happiness, but everyone wants to find out for themselves. And it's so true. It's a common understanding that it won't bring you happiness, but everyone wants to find out for themselves. So to me, money was an example of that. Can you think of any other examples that the more you have of it, the more that it loses its power?
This is probably not a great answer, but I would say everything. Like too much of, there's literally nothing that I can think of that is better the more you have it. Like even simple things, right? Like I remember always being, and this is an interesting example to use, but I remember even with the kids, it's like, all right, because we're in lockdown at the moment, it was always, well, you know, the dream's always, let's spend more time with the kids. Let's just hang out with the kids more. And then you get that in lockdown. You get to spend every single day with the kids. But it's like, I don't know if quantity is actually quality here. Like, yeah, it's been amazing, but there's probably a time where that even gets too much. Yeah, no, they know. They need to understand this. This is how parents really feel.
But it's so true. It's so true. Balance, I mean, thank you for being so transparent and sharing that truth, right?
Yeah, well, anyone who's been in lockdown, especially in a Victorian Melbourne lockdown, I think that has younger children at home is probably be like, yeah, I think quality time, like quantity time with the kids is probably being ticked off. It's now time for them to go back to school and live their lives. But yeah, I think it applies to everything. Even when the other example is I look at the books behind me here, where I used to have a much smaller library in this study. And then the books that I actually really loved and enjoyed, they would stand out and I'd pick them up. Whereas now when I look at that wall, there's just too many there. And again, it's probably one of those things where there's just too many items that you end up looking at none.
I think this is why people yo-yo in life between being unhappy and happy, because this is just kind of my experience, right? When I focus too much on work, I'm unhappy. Probably because I'm doing too much work and it's becoming boring to me. And then when I focus too much on my personal life, and again, like you said, being with family, following my certain interests, then I also get unhappy. It's that middle ground, isn't it? With everything, it's that middle ground. And I've been watching a series on Netflix recently. Have you seen the Squid Game? Have you heard of the Squid Game? Okay, so it's an interesting Korean series. It's kind of a take on Hunger Games, but they do it in their own different way, or Battle Royale for those people who've seen that show.
I love Battle Royale.
And dude, it's so you might like the Squid Game. You should check it out.
Cool. All right, I'll check it out.
This won't spoil the thing for you, but right at the end, there's an old man that
right at the end. This won't spoil the thing for you. You're just going to share the ending.
I will, but I promise it won't, because you won't have context until you watch it, right? Okay. But in the end, the old man says something that I thought was really fascinating. And I wrote down what he said. And he goes, do you know what someone who has lots of money has in common with someone who has no money? Living is not fun for either of them. It's boring. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Because, again, when we see those who have billions of dollars or millions of dollars and we see them on Instagram or we see them on social media, to us, it seems so exciting because they've just bought a new Bentley, they've just bought a mansion, they've just bought a jet. But the reality behind this is that those people who have those things and have the capacity to buy those things, they can buy 20 Bentleys if they wanted to. They could buy 50. They could buy 10 private jets, or maybe they could buy 100 of them. So to them, it's boring. And what you learn through watching this series is that, those who are ridiculously wealthy, they're bored. And those who don't have enough resources are kind of bored and suffering as well. So they're both at each end of the spectrum suffering in their own right. Whereas we have this illusion in our minds that those people who have the most money in the world, they're living the best life. But the reality of it is that they're so bored that it's driving them mad. And it kind of reveals to us that the best place to live is, kind of in the middle. Because in the middle, you're not quite suffering as if you have no financial abundance, but then you're not quite suffering on the other end. The middle is kind of the way, right?
Yeah. Well, it's also, there's a lot of studies done on people that win the lottery. And it's the same thing where previously, you might have been in the middle class or wherever, but then now there's this huge amount of money that's just been put into your ecosystem. And one of the theories is that what ends up happening is the slingshot effect, because once people then leave their social circle because they've had that money come in, or, relationships break down because of issues to do with the lottery winnings or whatever, a lot of people actually self-sabotage themselves on those winnings so they can then return to the pack. And whether they, lose it all, subconsciously make terrible decisions with it, give it away, squander it, whatever, it ends up just returning in there. And I think that's also probably deeply rooted to how we're programmed, whether that's imposter syndrome or just wanting to be part of our tribes and our communities and to fit in, that it's uncomfortable at the extreme ends of all walks of life.
Wow. I mean, it's a marketing book, but there's a life lesson in it.
Yeah.
Too much of anything is a bad thing. And it's true, even with, exercise, right? You could over-exercise and then harm your body and hurt yourself. That's so crazy to think that once you do too much of something, it loses its power. And to have that awareness, even in business, is important. The mass media in this sense. I have not watched a commercial in years, and to think, even for myself, when I see Facebook ads, I scroll past them very quickly. And the only ones that I ever stay on are the ones that are relevant to me right now or things that I care about. It's the only ones I currently look at are the ones that are based on camping. Anything camping, I will stay and actually watch the ad. Anything outside of that, probably not watching it, probably not looking at it. It's interesting to see that Seth Godin was able to see this years ago, that the mass media has lost its power. And
it's phenomenal just with Facebook and the platform that they've created, with how many of the ads that you do get targeted with are relatively relevant to what you might be interested, whether that's through remarketing. And just for people that don't know how Facebook ads work, but a lot of the times they're following all your behaviors and your interests. If you click on a website, there's a cookie on your computer, and then that website then has that data. They can then remarket back to you with a variety of different offers, depending on even the actions that you've taken on that website, on what pages that you're using. And it can lead, I do give credit when I see an ad that is just on point and speaking to me. I'm like, that marketing execution of the digital marketing at that point is just usually quite amazing to be able to give you the right message with the right offer at the right time that then gets you to convert. It's something that I'll always note down or take note of, because it's pretty rare these days, because we do see so much information being slammed at us from so many different angles.
I have to say that when it comes to business, the only way that the only strategy I feel that I've really used is word of mouth.
Mm.
I don't feel like I've learned how to play the marketing game very well, because the marketing game, like a spider, has many legs, right? I feel like the only leg that I've learned how to use is the word of mouth. Create something that's high quality, and then once you deliver that product or service, that person will then go tell another person.
Yep.
And I feel like that's probably been something that's limiting for me, because naturally this is what I'm good at. So naturally this is the only thing I've focused on.
Mm.
And yeah, reading this book, I mean, this morning I set up a call at 6:30 a.m. with a potential service provider in the US, just to learn more about SEO and how they can improve my general marketing, right? And it's interesting because, again, I've only had one go-to move, and that's the only move I've been using. And this book has really made me start to think about, wow, there's so many other moves you can get good at, and you've got to become a little more well-rounded as opposed to just using that one go-to move.
Yeah. I think from using especially digital marketing a lot over the last 7 years, and because even when I look at golf, for example, we're probably one of the first to really utilize the digital ad platforms in our space back when we kicked off in 2014. I think the beauty of marketing is, again, it goes back to having both. Like, the marketing is an amplification. So if you've got something at its core that has value, then the marketing can help with spreading that. Whereas, and that's one of the really good points that this book makes, is previously, back prior to the digital, call it, revolution, if you had $1 billion, you would just slam everyone with enough advertising, regardless of how good or bad your product was, and you'd get a result, just because there wasn't that many products competing for that mental space. Whereas nowadays, you could still use marketing very effectively, but it has to be aligned with a product and being able to target the right people who then want and need it. But then also the messaging and the core features and the quality of that product has to be good enough. And that's one thing that even now that you'll find with digital marketing is people can have some success very short term with a relatively average product, right? Like, they can go out there and maybe they'll get close to breaking even, or maybe 2xing or 3xing something that's an okay product, but it'll have a very limited shelf life. So to me, what I'm always looking for is what are the things out there that have been marketed digitally but have lasted longer than 3 or 5 years? Because that generally will need some sort of word of mouth element to it and some spreadability. Because at some point, the cost of marketing to that audience, the cost per acquisition, will become too high. I know we're getting a little bit technical here, but I think it's just an interesting concept. Just if you are thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to get, if I only had $100,000 to advertise my idea, it would be a success. Yeah, maybe it might, maybe it won't, because at its core, it still needs to be a very value-packed and value-driven product that your audience wants and needs.
Yeah, and again, it's just reminding me that value isn't just about quality. Value is about how unique something is. So then one of the questions you asked earlier was, how do you stay remarkable? Meaning, how do you stay unique? How do you continually stay unique? Because one of the main strategies that every business uses is that follow the leader strategy, right? It's very popular, but it's not very effective, because you could follow the leader for the next 12 months, but then the market dramatically changes. For example, if you're following the leader in the keynote space and you're a keynote speaker, if you followed the leader in 2019, well, the market completely changed in 2020 because everything went from in person to virtual. Following the leader in 2019 would have not helped you in 2020. So it's, how do you remain that leader? How do you become that leader that always pushes the boundaries, always remains unique, always remains high quality? So high quality is something that I think is controllable, because the more time and effort you put into something, the better it is, right? Whereas to me, the most unique, that always changes. So what that means is, to be the most unique, one part of it is you have to continually be willing to take risks, right? You have to be willing to do what's not considered normal in your industry.
Yep.
And that's hard. because that's scary.
One of the notes that I highlighted was when he speaks about, look, a lot of us probably have a version of a purple cow that we're still cashing in on. So even if you're in, whether it's in a job or a business, the likelihood is that you did something or you provided some form of value, either because you have a skill in finance or marketing or whatever it is, right? That you're now leveraging and you're collecting from. So if you're getting paid a salary for the value that you provide, it's because you did something probably purple cowish at some point in the past. And I love his point where he speaks about you need to cash in on the purple cows that you've created for as long as you can, because they do have a shelf life. But then you need to take some of that, what you've got from your original purple cow, and then you need to invest that into building out new purple cows and spreading that. And I think that's a really cool concept where you can roll with multiple strategies. And your purple cows might be at different stages in their life cycle. Like one might be a puppy purple cow that's, you're not sure whether it's going to make it or not. But you still maybe need to nurture it a little bit. You might have one that's an old purple cow that's still pretty purple, but it's turning into a normal cow.
It's turning
slowly.
grey. Yeah.
It's turning a bit grey. So it's
Yeah.
coming to its end of the shelf life. And I think that's the beauty of this philosophy as well. If you incorporate it, it's a lot of it's around analysis and being like, okay, well, where do I have purple cow opportunities? Am I currently involved with any purple cow box tickets? If somebody's just tuned in now, they'll be like, what are these guys talking about?
What are these guys talking about?
Well, why do they keep saying purple cow?
No, but that's a really good point, because if it's like if something is not working, if a business idea, if your career is not going anywhere, it's probably because, again, going back to the purple cow analogy, you're not unique. You're not remarkable. You're not great. You're just kind of average. And I love that what you just brought up is that if you are achieving any kind of success, you're probably riding a purple cow. Now, whether that purple cow is at the end of its unique life or brilliant, remarkable life, or if it's at just the start of its life, it's good to have that awareness, because it's like that saying, while the sun is shining, that's the best time to fix the roof, right? So if you're riding a purple cow right now, now's the best time to start thinking about, how can I invest in the next purple cow, or how can I make some moves that are a little more risky?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think the book, I remember Seth Godin talks about one of the biggest things that hold us back from taking moves that help us breed more purple cows or better ideas or risky ideas is we're so afraid of people judging us. That's one of the biggest reasons why we don't do anything that's different. We don't become leaders in our industry, because we're afraid of criticism. We're afraid of other people saying bad things about us.
Yeah, for sure. It even ties in a lot with Brené Brown's teachings around vulnerability. And I think in one of her books, she talks about entrepreneurship at its core is actually one of the purest forms of vulnerability, especially at the beginning and early stages, where that entrepreneur goes out and they take a chance on something where they might be ridiculed, where they'll feel fear and they'll feel the feeling of failure, and it might upset people and it might change up their current environment and the security. But then I think what happens is, as that entrepreneur becomes more comfortable and more successful and more attached to their creation, it becomes very hard to then continue on with that level of vulnerability and that risk taking. And that's why you don't see many companies, and it's very difficult to do, just continuously reinvent themselves, because everyone's so hooked on the cow that got them there. And it's very difficult to create multiple purple cows.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think, even in my own line of work, I feel like I've been able to create a purple cow in the keynote world, even in the workshop world. But then when it came to the online course world, I haven't created that purple cow, and I want to, and I'm going to. It's interesting to see how hard it actually is. And I mean, I want to stay on that fear of criticism point for a second. you've been an entrepreneur now for years, as long as you probably can remember. How have you been able to desensitize what other people think of you? I mean, that's one of the main things holding people back from entrepreneurship. It's one of the main things holding people back from being different, from doing something that's unique. I just feel like that's something we should try to address anyway, because that's the one thing stopping purple cows from existing is the fear of what other people think.
It's a very interesting question. I think you always, like, you still care, obviously. I think it's very hard for an entrepreneur to put their hand on their heart and say, oh, I just don't care what anyone thinks. Because a core driver behind why people enter the space of entrepreneurship is they want to actually create things for people based on their view that they understand what people think so that they can create these things for them. So I think it's really hard to, like, on one hand say, oh yeah, I don't really care. But my theory was always that if no one cares, that's the worst. So I'd way rather people love it or hate it. But indifference means that it's irrelevant. So
it's invisible.
It's invisible. So I know that if somebody's hating on something, at least there's an opposite where there'll be an equal size of people that might actually love it as well. And then for me, it's always been about alignment. And it's around ignoring the people that it's not necessarily designed for and focusing on those that you can provide value to. You know, it's a bit like the man in the arena quote where it's like, all right, well, if like I just really couldn't care that much about anyone's feedback that has no direct or potential positive input on whatever it is that I'm sharing or trying to create. Like, to me, that opinion doesn't factor in at all, because it's like, okay, well, because usually the people that are very negative and don't have any constructive criticism to provide, they would most likely have a trend that they're being negative about a lot of other things. And they're probably not the type of person that's adding too much value anyway. So to me, that's a very easy one just to click delete on and just to move past. Whereas if it's somebody that I really respect, that I know that's got a nice balanced approach where they provide positive criticism, positive feedback, they provide constructive criticism, then 100% I'm listening to them, right? Like if I get a random comment saying, hey, Ali, that thing that you shared just wasn't very good, I probably don't care too much. But say if you and two of my other good mates and Chantel then all sort of come to me like, hey, I don't know if that one was, you know, that's solid. Maybe you should change the approach next time. 100% I'm taking that on board. And it's just a way of filtering, I think, who you listen to and what noise you let in.
Well, that's the skill. It's the skill of being able to filter in what is constructive feedback and what is just irrelevant feedback. And I think what's really important is to share the man in the arena quote. I love that quote. So that's what I was quickly just Googling. And do you mind if I just read the quote?
Brown. Yeah, read it. It's an awesome quote.
It's fantastic. It's a quote from Theodore Roosevelt, right? And this is the quote. Well, this is the passage. It says, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there's no error without effort, and no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows with great enthusiasm and great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best in the end, who at best knows in the end triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who never know either victory nor defeat." That's the quote. And I think the main part of that quote passage is that don't listen to people who don't have experience. They don't have the experience of being in the arena with you. So say, for example, imagine somebody gives you feedback on your podcast and they've never tried doing podcasts before.
Or never listened to a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. You know, or have listened to a podcast before. It's like if my parents gave me feedback on doing podcasts. You know, my parents don't listen to them and they don't do them. So if that person's got no experience of being in the arena, you've got to be careful about taking on their advice.
Your parents are pretty wise, though, so I'm probably going to take their advice. If they have any feedback, I'm open to that.
Well, no, they didn't have any feedback for us, but they haven't even listened to our podcast. So to me, I think that's a great piece of advice. That's a great piece of wisdom to remember, is that be able to filter, first of all, and filter based on people who have experience in the same arena that they're giving you advice on. Yeah, I think that's for sure. That's brilliant. And let's bounce back and forth a little bit because, go ahead.
No, just the other thing on this is I think one of the biggest antidotes to entrepreneurship or any type of creativity is just that fear of judgment and fear of failure. Like, very few people have bad ideas, but not many, I think, are comfortable with being able to commit to that uncomfortableness that this journey requires. You know, so you get past that initial fear of failure, that's probably 80% of the battle.
Well, let's jam on this topic for a bit longer because I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with. I mean, I even shared you a screenshot of someone who sent me messages of them being afraid to share who they really are even. Yep. This is not even sharing an idea or a product, but just sharing with their audience more about who they are as a person. I feel that there's such a fear of what other people are going to think. So you've already shared one brilliant idea. I've got one as well. And we mentioned this in a previous podcast, but anything that I share, whether it's a product or a service, I just look at it as a 1.0 or a 2.0 or a 3.0. I don't look at that thing that I share as being the final thing that I'm going to leave this world. Even books that have been bestsellers, 10 years on, they create a revised version. You know, I remember recently looking up one of the books that I really loved and wanted to read again, The E-Myth. And I found a revised version that they just recently did a few years ago. And it's a classic and it's a bestseller, but even then they revise it. So again, in your own mind, don't just think, oh, this one thing that I've created, this is the one thing that's going to be out there and I never can revise it. Not true. One of the things that I think helps is knowing that it's just your 1.0. Yeah. So it's okay.
What tips do you have for people? Because this is something that I get asked a little bit, is if you're working for a company, but then you want to share yourself publicly. I think a lot of people that work for, say, larger organizations or brands or government agencies or schools, they're a little bit more concerned about sharing who they are, whether it's on social media or on LinkedIn. Do you have any advice for people in that group?
You have to learn how to do it. You have to learn how to share vulnerably in a safe setting first before you do it in a higher risk setting. For example, I mean, the simplest analogy I'll use is you shouldn't play the saxophone for an audience of 10,000 before you've learned how to play it yourself privately first. Because the first time you share authentically, you may overshare, and there is such thing as oversharing. Yep. And the first time you share a story that's deeply vulnerable, you may cry uncontrollably, and then therefore that's not going to be a good experience for you or the people you're sharing that vulnerable story with. So again, to me, what you've got to do is first learn how to share in a vulnerable way in a safe and controlled environment. Do so with your friends in a one-on-one setting first before you do it on a LinkedIn post, right? That's what I would say. You shared a message with me just a few days ago about how I could share with the person who was asking me, how can you be more vulnerable? And one of the first things you said was learn how to communicate more effectively and masterfully. That's what you got to do. You got to learn how to do this well first. A lot of people have this misconception that for me to be very authentic or for me to be very sincere or to be very transparent and real, I should just say immediately what's on my mind. That's not generally true. The first thing you say that comes to your mind generally is the most reactive thing. That's not the most authentic version of you. The most authentic version of you is generally the version of you that you've put thought into, that there's been deep thought, that you've spent hours thinking about it and really dissecting it, pulling it apart. It's not just the first thing that comes to your mind. It takes time to really craft an authentic conversation or an authentic piece of content. So I would say do it in a safe environment first before you just go live and then just blurt out something that you didn't want to initially say and then cause misunderstandings.
Yeah. It is a really interesting concept because I wonder how, especially in this modern world, how important it is for people to unleash their most authentic self. Like we just hear it so much nowadays. Even people when they leave their jobs, they're like, oh, I just couldn't be myself there. Or I wasn't with my tribe. Like it just feels like people have such a yearning for this where, when people talk about freedom, I feel like so many people are craving that freedom of being who they are or even finding who they are.
Okay, well, we're going to get a bit philosophical here, but everyone is a purple cow. Really. We're all unique. We all have our uniqueness. What happens is when you get into a job or any career path, even in entrepreneurship, what happens is the purple in us fades away and we're forced and told to be black and white. We're told to become that black and white cow. We become a cog in a machine, and whether it's our workplace or whether it's the mind games we play with ourselves, we trick ourselves, or our workplace tricks us into becoming the black and white cow. And then by the end of it, 3-4 years into the career, we have lost the purple. We're no longer unique. We're now just ordinary and bland. And I think that's what makes us really unfulfilled. Because if you think about it, every single human being is unique. Have you ever met someone that's the same as another person you've met? It's everyone looks different. Everyone sounds different. Everyone lives different. But what happens is I feel like jobs in their very nature, they stop you from being unique because you don't want a group of 10,000 unique employees, do you? You'll probably create too much chaos. I don't know. Will it create too much chaos? I'm not sure. I mean, but we tend to get groomed to become a cog. That's a part of a system that doesn't change, that stays the same, so that the rest of the machine works nicely.
For sure. Even when I think about to my best team members that I've had, if the environment was cultivated for them to be close to who they are and, aligned with their unique skill set, that generally resulted in the best outcomes. Just because you're just ticking that box of alignment, whether it's value alignment, passion alignment, skill set alignment, it really means that you don't need much management at that point. Because while that person's still engaged and aligned, everything's relatively automatic because I think individually, most people have a yearning to also express their purest form of creativity and work. And I think most people really appreciate when they get an opportunity to do that in a workplace as well, or in a team, for example. So it's just something that I'm always really mindful about is, does this business or does this team or does our strategy allow for the core and key team members to be able to express their skill set and their strengths in the purest form? And there's something very special about watching that process happen, whether it's growth or when you see somebody get closer and closer to achieving their potential that was previously dormant or unlocked. Like the amount of people that I've worked with that were like, oh, in my previous job, like I wanted to do all this stuff, but I was just never allowed to because of the structures and my boss wouldn't allow it. Like to me, it feels like such a lost opportunity around growth and development because you're losing out on their actual core value. Because ultimately all of your results are going to be the outcomes of the team members and their actions and their ideas and their creativity and their energy. Like you don't really have much without that.
That reminds me of that quote. I think it was Steve Jobs that said it, or I'm not sure if it was him, but it's the whole why hire great people and then tell them what to do. it's you hire brilliant minds and then you tell them how to think. It doesn't really make sense. And why hire that person in the first place? You should just,
and it's such a tricky balance too, because it's like you need structure or some sort of system. Otherwise it's just chaos, right? Like people are just acting because that's the other thing about an organization. It needs cohesion too. So it's such a weird thing, like to get a really good team, whether it's in sports or business or just in life in general. Again, that's a purple cow type of event, because it's a bit like when we celebrate the great championship teams in sports. It's like they're unique. They happen once every 5 years, once every 10 years, whatever it is, once a generation. I love the quote in the book as well, where it's something along the lines of, the opposite of remarkable is very good. And it's so true. But it's such a fine line. Like a lot of things are very good, but very few things are actually remarkable. Like you think about, I was just looking at the football season this year, and
Australian football, or you talking about soccer?
Australian rules football.
Okay.
But you could substitute anyone, any football. But like, no one talks about who came second or third or fourth, even though they were that close, usually a point or two away from achieving it. Like all of the accolades, and in 20 years' time, there's no 20-year reunion for the team who came third. There's only a 20-year reunion for the championship team. They're the only ones that are sort of immortalized in that, in the conversation and in the stories. And I was like, that's just the amount of factors that have to take place for you to be in that group.
It just made me think in that if the entire field was filled with purple cows, purple cows are no longer purple cows.
No.
If everyone was great, then great wouldn't mean anything anymore. It's almost like there has to be the black and white cows in order for the purple cows to stand out. And it's normal for remarkable to be that hard, because if it were easy, far out, everyone could do it, right? I mean, it just goes to show that the level of persistence you have to have, the level of clarity, the level of, oh my goodness, chemistry among team members, the alignment. There are so many factors that I wish this book spent more time defining remarkable and all the different elements that remarkable is made up of. I felt like it kind of blew past that too quickly. It didn't define it in enough depth for me. I'm so glad we're talking about it now, because it's just showing me that a part of remarkable when it comes to a team sport, when it comes to a business that has more than one person, is that the alignment and the chemistry also breeds remarkability. If you don't have that, then far out. You're not, as a team, you're not going to create something remarkable. Remarkable doesn't just come from one person. And we've seen this in sport, having one star player on the team doesn't mean that team's going to win the championship. And we've seen that multiple times. It requires a team of brilliant humans, not just one person.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. And look, I mean, to bring it back on the original point that I was talking about, was that one of the things that stops us from being remarkable, or one of the things where we stop our team members from being remarkable, is, again, we're afraid of that criticism. And another point that helps me in doing something that may be unique, that may attract criticism, is the whole concept that no one really cares that much about what you do anyway. There's that Mark Twain quote. I made a social media post about this a couple of weeks ago. And Mark Twain's got this brilliant quote where he says, "You worry less about what people think of you when you realize how seldom they do." And it's that people aren't thinking about you as much as you think. Yeah. I have so many of my students who are afraid of creating a video and putting it on their LinkedIn, because they're afraid of what their boss might think, because they're afraid of what their colleagues might think. And the reality is, people probably won't even watch it. People probably won't even watch the whole 10 minutes or the 5 minutes or the 2 minutes. And it's just because they don't care. Look, you've got to take this with a pinch of salt, because look, people do care, but at the same time, they don't care. They care more about how their children are going through school that week, or they care more about the financial struggles that they have that month, or They care more about the investments they had that kind of plummeted in the last 3 months. They don't really care about your video on LinkedIn. And to me, that's something that helps me when I'm getting a bit critical or a bit too concerned about what other people might think. It's that people don't care.
Yeah. It's the same concept in golf. People are always so worried that, is everyone else watching my golf swing? Are they worried about me hitting it this far or out of bounds? And that's the other reality, is that it's the same thing. No one cares. Everyone's too focused on their own swing. They're worrying about the exact same things. Like, are people looking at my swing? So they don't have the bandwidth to be able to look at yours. They're worried about their own game. And I think that law and rule of life probably applies in most spaces. And here's the other side to it, is I think a lot of people, even when they're thinking about sharing stuff, the first picture usually comes to their mind is their like nemesis or that judgmental person. Like, they can, just when I've spoken to people, they nearly think that if I share this, that's the person that's going to watch this thing and then they're going to say stuff. And it's like, you can't base it on having that image, because that person's probably going to do those things anyway. It doesn't matter whether you share it or not, but it's the other 99% of people that you might be able to add value to. Again, going to that same mindset, creating for them.
And here's the thing you've got to remember as well. A lot of the times that one person that we imagine, and that person's real, it's not just imagination, that there are those negative nincompoops out there in the world that just crap on everybody's idea. But when that person says you can't do something, when they say you can't do something, what I feel is the truth behind that statement is that they're saying they can't do that, and they're trying to impose their idea of what they can and can't do on you. Often when someone says you can't do something or something's impossible, it's more a reflection on them not believing that they can do it.
Yeah.
It's not a true reflection on whether you can do it or you can't do it, because they don't know your true capabilities. They don't know you. I mean, they can't know you as well as you know you. So their advice is just based on what they think can or can't be done.
Yeah.
Their opinion is just based on their capabilities.
I agree. Just as you were saying that, I think a little tactic to overcome that fear of judgment, and I'm going to create a new term, but I think you nearly have to look at it with the only child mentality. And I say that because I'm an only child, but when you grow up as an only child, because you don't have siblings and you don't really grow up with, sharing the space too much, I think it gives you nearly an ability to just sort of go down your own path a bit more. And I think that that's something where if you find yourself in the mindset of worrying what other people think, or if you identify more as a people pleaser, is when you have that moment, is just turn on the only child switch and make it a little bit more tunnel vision, that it might help you with blocking out some of the noise.
Yeah, I really like that. That's a really good point. And I think what you've also got to understand as well, to add on to that, is you just can't please everyone. I think the whole idea behind a perfectionist or someone who is a perfectionist is we want everyone to be happy. It's not, I want 99% of people to be happy. No, I want 100% of people to be happy. I want 100% of people to love and adore what I'm doing. I want 100% of people to be inspired by it, entertained by it. That's just not possible. And I think when you try to please everyone, just like the famous quote in theater, if you try to please them all, you please no one. If you try to please them all, you become, just boring. You become cardboard, right? You've got to make sure that that's not what you're trying to do here. And this book talks to it as well. It's create something for a unique segment of the market. Because when you're trying to be unique, you will only ever be unique for a certain segment of the market. You can't be unique for everyone. And I mean, I think Lady Gaga is a good example of that, right? When she was at the peak of her fame, she would do these crazy publicity stunts or marketing stunts or whatever they were, where part of the market would love it and go, wow, that's so artistically beautiful and that's so meaningful philosophically. Whereas part of the market goes, this woman's crazy. This is the worst thing I've ever seen, right? This is what you're wearing a meat dress? This is disgusting. So she got so much criticism, but part of the market loved it and adored her even more. So I think, again, just stop trying to please everyone and know that if you go down the path of wanting to create something remarkable, or if you want to be that purple cow, you're going to upset some people. You're going to make some people not like you. And that's okay. That's the price of entry when you're creating something remarkable.
Yeah, I think that point of starting with a niche is really important. And that applies to everything. You know, I think we keep going back to this, but whether it's applying for a job or it's starting a business, like even things like Facebook, they started off as a niche. Like that started off with Harvard and Ivy League colleges, and then it started spreading. Like most things start off with that small group of highly defined early adopters. And then if you get lucky and you execute really well, then you might be able to cross that adoption curve. And I think this is another really big one for career advice, just in general, is don't go to where all the masses are. Like try to find the edges a little bit. Because even when I remember when we would advertise for roles, like funnily enough, the roles with the highest salaries and probably the most prestigious roles actually had the least number of applicants because people were generally too scared to apply for them. You know, and there were so many people that I remember speaking to where if they would have applied for some of those roles, they would have got them, but it was uncomfortable. It was, I'm not ready for that. It's not my position. And then when you'd sit on the panels for those roles, there'd be like 4 or 5 applicants and a lot would be relatively mediocre because they've overvalued their abilities and their skills, and you're not probably getting the right fit for that role. But then you would look for a more middle level role and you would put that out there for application. You get like 650 applications for it. And there was so much competition in the middle. And I'm guessing the same thing probably exists in keynote speaking. It exists everywhere, where how many people are actually fighting for the top end of the keynote speaking market? But I'm guessing it'd be a lot less than people that are fighting for the entry level or the middle A, because that's where they think that they're at.
You know, that reminds me of a story when I first started my keynote speaking career. I had an invitation to speak for an association in India, and it was for their association of CIOs over there. And I remember in the email, they asked me for my fee. And I was like, oh, at the time when I just started out my career, I was like, oh, okay. So right now I'm $2,500 a talk. And back in 2014, when I sent that email to them, this is the reply I got. The reply I got was basically this: "Oh, Vin, we're looking for someone around the $15,000 caliber. Unfortunately, we're not looking for someone at your caliber." And I was like, what the hell? So I just wrote the wrong price. And I didn't realize that price was such a huge indicator of value.
Yeah.
And that was when I first learned the lesson of, you know,
you're like, oh, whoops, it was a typo. I missed a zero.
I forgot I missed the zero. And it was crazy that's how I first learned that lesson was, again, most people don't aim high. Most people aim low. And then as a result, miss out on all the brilliant gigs out there, right? So it just reminded me of that. You know, it's sometimes we undervalue ourselves so much that it cripples us, and we don't even realize it, because some of the lessons don't come as point blank as the one that I experienced. You know, I undervalued myself fully, and it took a punch in the face like that to realize it. And a lot of the times we don't get those punches in the face that teach us those lessons so blatantly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That's actually really good career advice too that you just shared.
This point's pretty cool.
Okay.
Well, we'll change tacks. And it's just something that stood out is I love Seth Godin's writing style, because it's got like this cheekiness and naughtiness nearly to it, you know, where it just questions
why I love
all
his
the
blogs.
convention. Yeah, it's brilliant. Like even if you've never read, even if you don't want to read his books, just go read his blogs, because they're highly entertaining. This one was, I love where he goes and he starts discussing the concept of cheating in business. And it's a hilarious spin because he's like, JetBlue is always cheating. Their low-cost structure, underused airports, young non-union staff give them an unfair advantage. Starbucks is cheating. The coffee bar phenomenon was invented by them, and now whenever we think coffee, we think Starbucks. Amazon.com is cheating. Their free shipping and huge selection give them an unfair advantage over the neighborhood store. Like, it's a brilliant concept here around nearly viewing your purple cowness or your remarkability as a form of like cheating. Like, can you create something so good that to your competitors and to everyone out there, it nearly feels like you're cheating just because what you're doing so exceptional? I was like, that's brilliant.
I got one for you.
Yeah.
I can tell you that one thing that every single other keynote speaker thinks when they think of me is that Vin is cheating because he has magic.
Yeah, for sure.
They think this. And this is one of the reasons as well, reading that passage, it's why one of my biggest goals by the end of this year is to write up 6 new modules where I've connected new pieces of magic to my speaking points. Because that's how I can continue to cheat in my game, right? It's how I can continue that process. And if you can cheat, why not? You know, this is a great way to cheat, you know, especially the way that Seth Godin puts it is that think about your industry. And if anyone has ever said, oh, you're cheating because of this, because I know as well, it's not cheating, but it's perceived to be that way. Because, man, it takes months upon months to be able to connect a brilliant piece of magic with a brilliant concept in the area that I'm an expert on. It's so hard to come up with one of these things. So while it's being perceived as cheating, it's not. But I love the way Seth Godin spins it.
Yeah. Especially when I think when people are just first to do something differently, and then everyone's like, no, that's cheating. It happens in sports. You know, the greatest example is the high jump. I think his name was Fosbury Flop, that it's named after, where he was the first person to jump over the high jump bar, like twisting backwards. But because of that technique, he won gold medals and he had such an unfair advantage. But then all the competitors
people
were like,
used to jump before that?
I have no idea. I think they just like nearly, it was like a type of hurdle or something. Sorry, I'm not too well versed in the art of high jump. But either way, whatever he did was very unique and no one else knew how to do it. So they're all up in arms. They're like, oh, he's cheating. It's not fair. It's not fair. Now everyone does it that way. So it's a really interesting concept about creating a purple cow.
It's another thing
in your industry. Like Uber. Uber were cheating, right? They probably took it pretty far, but it still worked.
Well, that's right. I'm sure that all the taxis and the taxi industry looks at Uber and go, that's a form of cheating.
Yeah, for sure. Bitcoin at the moment, you know, everyone's like, well, that's cheating. It goes against government issued currencies and everything else that's in there.
But you know what's interesting? This is why I feel like as you read more books, it's so important for the brain. Because if you only read this book and this was the only book you've ever read, then you'd think that being remarkable in every area of life is critical. But it's not. Because it made me think of the reverse. Yeah. What are some areas in life where it's actually important to not be remarkable, where it's important to be average? Right? Like, again, can you think of any? I've got one straight up off the bat for you. And the most important area to be unremarkable in, I feel, in life is the area of investing. You want to be average. You want to invest in ETFs that return 5 to 8% every year. Whereas if you invest in remarkable things like Bitcoin, you can be in for an emotional roller coaster, right? Yeah. And when you look at, you know, you gave me this brilliant book on mental models by Charlie Munger, and it's so important, boring.
Yep.
You know, as he states, it's so important to be, you know, the most important area to be non-sexy and boring is investing.
My investing at the moment is completely the opposite to that.
Why is it really remarkable?
Everything is 100% speculative at best.
Oh, it's 100% remarkable then. Yeah, well, but that's the thing.
Yeah, it's or unremarkable. But I think that's the other point is the true opposite to remarkable is highly unremarkable. It's not very good. Like, I think he's got that quote wrong, is because that's the
Right.
other reality, right? Like, when you shoot for remarkability,
Yeah.
generally the paradox to that is if it goes badly, it's a big conventional failure, if that's how you choose to view it. So I think that's the other side that's important to note, is that nothing, because a lot of this concept of remarkability is around risk taking, that it's taking calculated risks that you have a chance at executing on, because I think that's what Seth Godin's really talking about. And that's just probably a pretty good life lesson anyway, is that the higher the risk you take, generally the higher reward on the other side. And the payoff is. But then you've also got to be open and comfortable with knowing that if you do go for that risk, the downside means that, yeah, there's an opposite force. There's a trade-off of some sort that's going to happen. And I think that's the same with investing. It's the same with work, with business, with everything.
Well, I mean, it's the truth, right? I mean, you could share some of your deepest thoughts and you could try some crazy ideas with your business, and that could be the end of your business. That could be the end of your career. You probably will get fired after you share that video, right? There is a reality to this as well. It's not just all aspirational and, oh, let's all be purple cows, because there is really a real risk. And again, that's why you've got to have experience. You've got to know what is too much, what is too little. You've got to have awareness. You know, are you playing it too safe? Are you playing it too risky? You've got to be aware. And then I think most people are not at risk of being too risky. I think most people are at the risk of being too safe. That's why the book doesn't really talk to that point. I think just because the assumption is, I think most of us are playing it too safe.
Yeah, I think, and this is just the method that I use, is that I like doing things that they nearly feel or they're perceived as being risky. But in my head, the actual risk I've tried to minimize as much as I can, but I can leverage the upside as much as possible. Like, say, the example of that was even starting Future Golf, which is the business, is I didn't take a mortgage out on my house. I didn't go and, quit my job and do like outrageous things that are sometimes the conventional ways that we hear these entrepreneurial stories. I used like a $50 ad voucher and a $50 website, and I tried to validate the idea, but I played to the upside, where it was like, okay, well, worst case scenario is I'll learn a little bit about starting a business. Best case scenario, it'll turn into something pretty cool. But then to the external world, there would have been people in my circle that would have been like, oh, what a risk, like starting something like this, risking something there. But it's actually, you can mitigate that. It's the same as even now, and I think cryptocurrency is a very interesting one. Like, since it is a big topic of conversation, and given that we play a little bit in that space, is one of the questions I always get asked every time, there's a peak or something, is like, oh, should I invest in this? Should I get involved? And my thing is like, look, well, invest in it. But the number one thing is don't put in more that if you lost everything, you wouldn't lose a wink of sleep over it. Like that's like, you can go and dabble and then you can play. And if you put in, whether it's $50 or $100 just to get familiar with the space and to feel like you're now crypto invested, that's great. But if you go and take out, you mortgage half of your house because you think that you're going to earn 20 grand in a day because your friend earned $500,000 in a week or something, I think then you're probably setting yourself up for punishment. There's a difference between low risk, sensible cracks at things that are speculative in alignment with your current financial position. And then there's a difference within going all in on something that you don't really know too much about just because everyone's doing it. And I think that's also something that we're seeing a lot of at the moment is, I think there's a lot of people out there that just want the quick result or the easy result, but I just haven't seen that play out that often for very many people.
I mean, even for me, it's about playing. It's about playing in a way where you have many opportunities to try to be remarkable. If you've only got one shot to be remarkable and you fail, you probably will never be remarkable again after that, right? It's about. I like what you said. It's risky, but it's sensible at the same time. I think it's about taking sensible risk. And it seems like those two words contradict each other, but they don't, because normally we play in a space that's completely risk-free. We all want the complete risk-free option. I think even those people who want to take a mortgage and do that, maybe that's probably the wrong way of doing it. But I think taking sensible risk is so important. And then it's a question you should ask yourself. What sensible risks are you taking with your life right now? Are you even taking any sensible risks? And yeah, I like that approach. It's that only invest what you're willing to lose. I think that's very sensible financial advice. But again, we're not giving you financial advice here.
No,
so
we're not financial.
Don't take any of this advice.
So don't take it. No.
Even though it sounds sensible, don't take it. Just don't take it.
We're not no qualifications here. Just coloring in that thought, I think another way of looking at it is what's something that you can do that maybe looks risky to others, but is actually not that risky to you. Right? And that probably touches a little bit on Tim Ferriss's concept that he talks about a little bit. Like, what's something that you find easy that other people find difficult? And if you could combine those two, it might help you with increasing your percentages of capitalizing on your purple cow a little bit more. Right?
Another point that I really enjoyed from the book is the whole idea behind focus on the customers who are willing to spread the word and people who are trying to adopt something new, right? And Seth Godin talks about how there are 5 groups of people that use and get into a product or service. And the first group are the innovators. And he says, these are the people who love and are eager to try new things. And the second group is the early adopters. These are the people who are interested in new products because they want whatever advantage they might have that the product or service might offer them. And the third and the fourth group, that's the early majority and the late majority. These are people who are pragmatists who get into something and they get into it because everybody else is already into it. And then there's the laggards. And these are the people who are reluctant to adopt anything new and will only do so when they absolutely have to. And it was cool kind of having these 5 categories of potential consumers being mapped out. Because when I looked at it, I am definitely not an innovator in a sense of that. I'm probably the early adopter though. Because when a new game is released, I'm usually one of the beta players. I've downloaded it and I'm one of the first players to pay it. I paid money to play it, but I know there's some glitches, but it's okay. Yeah. I still want to play it. Or when the first iPhone came out, happy to buy it. Don't need to buy version 2.0. When the first Apple Watch comes out, happy to buy it. Don't have to be the first, the second version. Which one are you, Ali?
I think I'm early majority. So I wait to see how it plays out a little bit, but I'm still relatively early. So I bought, say the iPhone. I think I got in at iPhone 3.
Oh, wow. You waited 2 iterations before you got in it.
I was iPhone 3. The Apple Watch, I think I was Apple Watch 3 as well.
Oh, first one.
Yeah, so I kind of see how it goes. I like getting things that are proven, but still relatively early. So
if we go back to what Seth Rogen says in this particular chapter, is that he goes, don't go for people like Ali. Don't try to target people like Ali who are the early and late majority market.
Well,
go for people
once
like
I buy it, you know that you're onto a good thing.
Yeah.
When you buy it, there's still a chance it's going to fizzle out.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's good. However, the person you should target is me, not you.
It's you. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We're targeting you.
Okay,
yeah. so because you're going to sneeze it as well. You're the perfect customer for an entrepreneur. Like if you're buying someone's stuff and you love it, I know you. You're going to buy it. You're going to tell everyone about it. You'll become the spokesperson for that brand.
I'll tell you this right now. I mean, even those around me who are absolute Android fans now have an iPhone. Okay. And I'll tell you this, Dan, who's one of our biggest fans of the podcast. So hello again, Dan.
Hi, Dan.
Dan is a massive Android guy. Okay. It doesn't even own a single Apple product. And I couldn't believe it. It just it thoroughly upset me. And I've known him now for 3 years, and now he has an iPhone, even though that was because I bought him one for his birthday. He now has an iPhone, and I remember asking him, I go, dude, how good is it? And he's like, look, I'll be honest, I really like it. Yeah. But to me, that was my greatest victory moment. It was when I converted him, even though I got him the phone. But
so you're the best type, because you then even do the conversion from like a rival product into the new. Like, that's amazing.
But how do I find more people like me? How do our listeners find people like me? I think that's something that's interesting, right? I think someone like me is someone who has credibility within their circle. Someone like me is someone who's very vocal about their experience. So you've got to be great, because if you come to someone like me, I'm less likely to badmouth a terrible product, but I'll never share it. I'll never sneeze. And what Seth Godin is talking about, again, it's like Seth Godin, I guess he wrote this before the coronavirus, so it's not that he's using this as an analogy, but he goes, the best kind of ideas are the ideas that spread like a virus.
Yeah, idea viruses.
Idea viruses. And the people that spread idea viruses the best are the people who sneeze a lot. So yeah, I mean, it just got me thinking. I didn't have too many thoughts that I wrote down, but I'm like, how do I find more people like me? How do I identify those people? And I think the world we live in now is easier because there are people that have a following. There are people who are leaders of online communities, or, for the lack of a better word, influencers. Influencers are the best sneezers. So it's about finding these influencers, giving them your product service for free is what people are doing. And then if they like it, they'll sneeze. Or you give them a benefit to sneeze. You entice them with an affiliate fee or a commission or a kickback.
A really good way, like in terms of businesses, is just using data that's available nowadays. Like if you have a product or a service where you've got a referral mechanism or an affiliate program, that's such an amazing way, because you're literally seeing people that are commercially vested and want to be rewarded for sneezing your product and want to be recognized for that. But the other part is that it's very hard to find people like you in that. Like, even if you look at that bell curve and the adoption curve throughout that process, the people that you want to target, probably out of your total market size of 100%, they make up somewhere between maybe 1 to 10% of people if you're lucky. But it's amazing though, because it is like a fountain effect, right? If you think about, if you get through to the early adopters and then they then spread it to me, who's the early majority, I'm still in that group where I'll then spread it to others, because now you've passed on the baton to me. I'll get people who are now in the late majority to then get onto that product. And then it's usually the late majority that get the laggards, because in the iPhone example, that's like our parents getting onto the iPhone and then telling their parents that you now need an iPad so I can FaceTime you. Right. So if you think about the iPad, that's now well past the laggard stage, because a lot of grandparents have it, and that wasn't the original target market. So that's like, if you think about, like, to me, the iPad, or even, I'd say the iPad's probably maybe even more so than the iPhone, just because it's crossed so many different markets. Like, kids use it, grandparents, everyone. But most houses would have a tablet or an iPad of some sort.
Oh, dude, there's 3 iPads in my house.
Yeah. So,
well, what that reveals as well then is that if you want to appeal to, I mean, Remarkable matters most to the early adopter market, because, if you already got an iPhone 3, why do you need an iPhone 4? Why do you need an iPhone 5? I mean, far out. There's only 2 generations from the model that I had. So to me, Remarkable means a lot, or it means the most to the early adopter market. So if you're following the rules of this book, you're appealing to the early adopter market, because they care about Remarkable the most.
Well, I think that's your starting point.
Mm.
is the early adopter. And one of the really good points in the book is that people, like, say, for example, if you're starting a new product, a lot of people quit before they've gotten through the early adopter cycle. And that's a real big point that I picked up in this book that I didn't realize the first time I read it, is the early adopters actually probably won't be the ones that give you a commercial return, because you're going to have to invest a fair bit to engage the early adopter. But where you will get your commercial return, funnily enough, is as your purple cow starts reducing being a purple cow, because that's when the early majority, because now you're just optimizing the core of what was built. Then you're getting the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. That's probably where you're going to get the commercial benefit off your product, because at that point, say if you're selling iPhones, you've now got economies of scale. You can improve the production off it. Every year you're just doing like a slight modification on that product. You're not really changing the game. Like the core of the iPhone hasn't really changed since iPhone 1. That was when it was a purple cow. Now it's no longer a purple cow. It's just a highly optimized purple cow that doesn't at the moment seem to be dying off too quickly. Like there's no wow factor. There's no one lining up for an iPhone anymore. Like it's just something that happens. It gets released every year. It's got a new camera, but
it's only slightly purple now. It's only slightly purple now. But the reason why I think it still does well, it's a slightly purple cow as compared to many other black and white cows.
Yeah.
You know, so even being slightly purple in a world filled with black and white cows is still beneficial.
Yeah, for sure.
But you're right. It's lost a lot of its color. But something you said there that I just really want to just reiterate again, because I think it's so brilliant, is that the commercialization doesn't come at peak purple. when you're the most purple, or when the idea is in its most remarkable form, that's not when you can commercialize it the best. That's really interesting. Wow. Well, I really like that.
Even when you think about art, like think about the great art that's now valued at such a high level. When it was actually a purple cow, like when that artist took that risk to create this piece of artwork, at that point for most artists, it's not commercially viable or remarkable. It's probably sitting in a dusty corner. It's only post-death or post-story or brand that artist's work is now valuable. Sometimes it's 100, 200, 300 years after it. Well,
The Alchemist was written so long ago, and it didn't become a bestseller till many years
25
after.
years later or something like that.
Yeah.
That's funny. So there's a difference between the creation, I think, of the cow and the benefit that the milk of the cow, call it.
This is man. I'm getting a lot more lessons from this podcast than I did just from reading the book. That's really cool. I really like that analogy. That's awesome. Okay. Well, I mean, I still want to spend a couple more minutes, if we can, on. Well, we know that sneezers are important. We know that people like myself are important. We know that people like you are important too, because you help with the gradual commercialization of the idea, and the abundance of profit comes from the audience like you. Yep. How else can we get the attention from people like me? I mean, I'm trying to think. People like me have their finger on the pulse. So I read the Mac forums. I read about the new iPhone before it even comes out. So people like me, we live on certain places on the internet for technology. I go through the forums. I love being on there. I love reading about new tech that's coming out. I love reading about Apple glasses, even though it hasn't been announced yet. I love that kind of stuff. So you've got to get good at learning where these people live. And I'm struggling to think where my audience lives when it comes to, let's say, for example, my online course, communication skills. Where do these people live? I mean, no one's on forums writing about how they want to improve their communication skills. I'm struggling to think. Can you think of where these people would exist?
For you, I think your core tribe, they lived where you were speaking. Yeah, like in that audience when you were performing a keynote. Like that was probably, for a lot of people that listened to you, that might have been the first form, and they were watching you deliver a purple cow at the time. So to me, there's so much power in that when you build that connection and you're already in a learning environment at a conference or where you are taking in a keynote, and you're then standing out like a purple cow because you're a better speaker than probably the majority of the other people that were speaking that day. It again just keeps amplifying the remarkability of it all. And I'm guessing a lot of people were probably talking about what you did after that experience, and then they were spreading that with their friends. So you were in that environment ticking a lot of boxes of a purple cow. Whereas if you're now doing an ad for an online course to a cold audience that maybe haven't seen you speak or haven't engaged with your content, they can't yet maybe see the purple cowness in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you still have to build that bridge of getting them to see that it's a purple cow that they're engaging with, because to them it might just look like it's an online course, and that because you're now competing with more noise. So I think when you're looking at that small subsection of the early adopters, they're the ones that are really hard to find through things like Facebook marketing. They're the people that you generally find, I think, face to face. Like even when I think about Future Golf, like those real sneezers and the early adopters, the people that really loved Future Golf, like that small 5 to 10%, they were the people that were coming to our events, our in-person events. And they were the ones that were really engaging with the community, and they would want to know more about the vision, and they'd want to know more about what we're doing for the game of golf and how can they get involved. Like they weren't the people that were just signing up because they saw an ad. Sometimes that was maybe how they started the journey, but it stopped at that point.
Did your early adopters help you shape Future Golf?
Yeah, 100%. The whole thing is built off them and based off them. Because without even for the first year or two, like the entire product and service was based on delivering them what they wanted and what they needed. So if they asked, we want to play this course, we'd go play that course. If we want this feature, we'll try to get that feature in. We need this process doesn't work that well. Can you guys fix it? We'll do it. And we'll do a survey every single year. We still do, where we get feedback and then you try to action it. The thing that happens though is as you get bigger and you go through that adoption curve, it gets harder to make those changes because when you're only servicing like 500 people or 1,000 people, everyone's voice is relatively similar and most people want the same thing, and you're small enough so that you can enact the changes pretty easily. Whereas nowadays, as you get bigger, it's harder to enact the changes. So you can only pick a couple of things. That's why even it's funny when I use things like Amazon, I have these questions. I'm like, why doesn't Audible connect with Kindle, and why do I have to buy it on separate things? And it's like, well, Amazon have trillions of dollars and they still can't figure out how to perfectly satisfy their customer, because that's how difficult it is to execute core systemic changes. And it doesn't matter whether you're servicing 1,000 people, 10,000 people, or 1 billion people. Making changes are very, very difficult at mass to service your audience. And it gets tougher to service that audience the more that they go down that adoption curve. You get a lot more flexibility from the people that are at your level and my level, where we're usually a lot more accepting. Whereas the laggards, like if their iPhone doesn't work, Apple's dead to them. It's true.
They'll tell you why the fax machine was so much better.
Yep, for sure.
Well, I mean, I the reason I asked if the early adopters help you shape your product is because that's definitely been the case for me. Is that my early adopters have always helped me with ideas. You know, they've always helped me understand what to change and what not to change. And whereas I find that the people in your audience, you know, that you represent, sometimes they don't know what they want, because so much of what they want is led by what the majority already want. Right? Whereas the early adopters really know what they want. And there's a lot of power being around people who know what they want, as opposed to being around a group of people who don't really know what they want, because they're the confusing audience. they confuse the hell out of you when you're first starting your journey, because they're the ones that are like, oh yeah, maybe I do want fries with that. Actually, no, I don't want fries. I want nuggets. Oh no, actually, I won't do any of that because I'm on keto. No, I'm not on keto anymore. I'm on, so it's just, wait, what? What do you even want? And I find that that's such a huge problem for so many people when they start on their journey, is because they're going for the wrong target audience. They're going for an audience that doesn't know what they want. Yeah. That's why it's so important to find early adopters, not only because they're sneezers or they spread the virus, but because they're very clear on what they want.
It's true. Even when I think back to your process, and funnily enough, with you, I actually was an early adopter. I wasn't part of the early majority because I remember going to your first communication workshop that you did.
Yeah, the in-person one. That was the first one.
I've seen and that was awesome. But like, it's techniques like that. You did that first workshop for like 10 people that you were pretty close to or that you had an established relationship with. And then you ended up building that product off the back of the feedback that you got in that environment. And I think that's a really core part to innovation, is just iteration. Yeah. It's putting that idea out there, V1ing it, as we say, doing the version 1, getting some feedback. But you can learn so much from that version 1. Like, I know now you've got version 16 of that course, but I'm sure the core of it, there's still core elements of it that are still really similar to the value proposition that existed in version 1.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what you're doing at the beginning. Is it's like, all right, well, even if only 10 people use this thing or 20 people use this thing, is it enough of a value proposition for them to want to keep using it? And then out of that 10 or 20, will at least 2 or 3 tell a friend about it? And if they do, you're probably onto something. But if you go to 10 people that tick that box, and then at the end of it, they're all like, yeah, that was good job, then you probably need to go back to the drawing board, because the core of what you created or the value proposition just wasn't quite right at that time.
No, that's good. This is a great discussion on the different types of audiences and how to best utilize, how to best discover them, and how to get their attention. That's awesome. Any other points on the book that stood out for you?
I think we've probably, from my end, I think we've covered a fair few. What about you?
I'm just looking through my notes, and I feel like
I'm just trying to think of more practical advice for the audience that sits outside of, say, even the business realm.
One, I've got a practical thing that I'm going to do for myself. And what I'm going to do for myself is, in particular with my online course. And right now, the reason I'm thinking so much about the online course is because I'm limited to being able to do in-person keynotes, in-person workshops, to doing it in South Australia right now. I can't travel anywhere else in the world, can't do any of it for any of my clients in the world. So to me, there's only so many of those I'm going to do in South Australia, which is about 2 or 3 a month at most. So I'm putting a halt on trying to further make those purple, all right? And I'm thinking and spending more time on my online course, because my online course can have way more scale, and I'm trying to make that more purple. So to me, I'm just going to write down, what are 3 bold ideas that I can come up with, and not be so afraid of what other people think, and put that aside and go, no, genuinely, what are 3 really bold ideas that I can come up with that online courses haven't done before? And that's hard to think about, but I'm going to dedicate time, lock away these block of 3 hours to just think, to just give myself time and space to think about what are some purple ideas that I could actually apply.
Sure.
So one very pragmatic thing. So just schedule the time and sit and struggle and try to come up with just 3 ideas.
Yeah, my tip would be very similar to what you said. Mine would be doing an audit or a bit of a reflection exercise around what are areas in your life where you could have a crack at doing something remarkable. So it probably builds on your point, whereas you're looking at a specific area and then trying to find 3 points. I'd be maybe doing a more holistic review of, okay, in work or in business or relationships or whatever it is that's running through your mind at the moment that you feel that's just sort of ticking along or is a little bit complacent. Is there, again, I'll use the same thing, 3 to 5 things that you can do that give you a chance at doing something remarkable or being part of something remarkable. And just one idea that, like, just because we've spoken a lot about business, like I think for the audience that are career focused or looking on that side is how can you, even if you're in a job at the moment and you feel like you're coasting, is there a way for you to add remarkability to that? Like, can you in the next month go and do some course, or can you execute a project or come up with an idea that gives you a chance at showcasing remarkability? Because even I think the attempt at that, if you're working in the right space and you're working in a place where you think that there's going to be a long-term future, good leaders or good colleagues will appreciate your attempt at doing something amazing. And if you get slammed for that attempt, it's probably a very good indicator that you're not in the right space or you're not aligned with the place that you're working with. So either way, it might be time to go do something remarkable for somebody else.
You know, one of the fastest ways I think professionals can become remarkable is build on your public speaking ability. It's very self-serving for me to say that. I get it, but it's really the truth. I've seen so many of my close friends, and I've seen this in my students as well, is that this is a skill that not a lot of people have. It's still one of the things that most people fear the most, is to speak in public. And when you think about your professional career, there are so many opportunities for you to stand up and speak publicly, whether it's in a team meeting, whether it's at a conference, whether it's in a virtual meeting for you to step up and take the screen real estate up for 15 minutes and present an idea or a topic, whether it's you training your peers in a topic that you're an expert in. It's one of the fastest ways to appear remarkable, because someone who can present well just radiates that remarkability. Whether you genuinely are remarkable or not, just the fact that if you could just do that, you come across as being remarkable. It's a remarkable quality, being able to stand up in front of your peers. So it's a very quick way to be able to do it. Well, it's not quick. It takes time to master the skill, but it is a skill set in the professional world that makes you come across as being remarkable.
Yeah, I think that's something that does get missed, is that your odds of, like, even going back to the work example, if you're going to get a new project over the line, your chances of succeeding with that are going to be increased significantly if you can communicate the idea well and you can pitch it. Let's do this for a bit of fun. Find something on your desk and just show us an example of how to pitch something and the core of pitching, because I think that's something. I'm putting you on the spot here. Let's see how good this guy is. All right. Can he walk the walk or walk the talk in your case? So,
okay, I've got something here.
All right.
People don't realize the value of sound, because what I'm holding is a lapel, right? This is a Sennheiser. I'll just show you so you can see. It's a Sennheiser lapel mic. It's a mic to clip into your AV kit when you're speaking. People think that the most important thing is video. They think the most important thing is seeing great, crisp video. But what they don't realize is that the voice has way more control over the mind than the eyes actually have. Because when you speak, you can, with your mouth and with your tongue, you can craft things with words that even visually, the things that people see can't craft. It's why in movies they spend just millions of dollars paying Hans Zimmer to create soundtracks, because they know that sound can control you emotionally way more than the visuals can. You know, it's when you watch a horror movie, the reason why they play those songs, it's because it scares you way more than just seeing the monster. In horror movies, sometimes you don't even see the monster. In fact, the movies where you get more scared, they're the movies where you never see the monster, but the monster, you're creating it, the image of the monster in your mind. And what's creating that image is, again, it's sound. It's sound. It's why I pay so much attention to, even I've improved the mic that I'm using. It's better than the one that Ali is using, which is the one we bought together, but I've improved upon it because I know the value of sound. And the value of sound is not just in the gear that you use, because I can buy a better mic every time. but it just gives me a 1%. You know, this mic is maybe 3% better than the mic that Ali is using. This lapel mic is maybe 5% better than the one I was using to create my social media videos. What gives you the 20 and 30 and 40% improvements is how you actually breathe. It's how you actually use your voice. It's the training that you put yourself through on a daily basis. That's what's most important. But it all comes down to sound. Because if you don't have great sound, you can have the great video, the best video, you can have the greatest scripting. But if the mechanism that delivers the sound being your voice and the gear that you use is average, then that's how people are going to perceive you. They'll perceive you as being average. So in closing, being remarkable with how we come across, I think, is not just the gear, but it's in actual the voice and who you are. You know, runs much deeper than just Sennheiser lapel mics or Shure microphones. It's about who you are as a person as well. It runs much deeper than that.
Love it. But so that's cool, right? Like, even like I put you on the spot there.
Yeah.
And you crafted something that was deeper. Like, even just pitching 101 is, you could tell that you had attempts there at emotional connection and depth that was past it just being a lapel mic with X features, and it's got a 3-meter length and it's got 3 5-star reviews at the moment. Like, you connected it with so much storytelling, even in that brief period of time, whether it was with emotion that you get from watching movies to the importance of improving your communication skills in alignment with the microphone. Like, that is an awesome skill that we could all learn and take away, where you add in more vivid storytelling into the way that we pitch ideas. And that was a cool example. I know it's improv and you were put on the spot there, but that was cool. I couldn't do that.
Yeah. And then I think the last thing I'll add to that as well is that, you know, my vocal teacher used to always say this, just to close up this thought, because I only had it once I stopped saying the pitch, is that your voice is your personality. And bringing that down to a more granular point of view, the sound you create with your mouth is how other people perceive your personality. And not only your personality, but whatever the product it is or service that you may be selling. That's how people perceive it. It's through your voice. And I think one of the fastest ways to become remarkable is learn how to use your instrument. Learn how to play it remarkably. And that's one of the fastest way and pragmatic ways professionally you can add remarkability. I mean, look, in closing out this episode, I think this is a great book, like you said in the beginning, to read when you're thinking about creating a product or service for the business world. But it's also a great book, I think, I mean, to take it from a philosophical point of view, to live or to create a unique product or to create a remarkable product. One of the most important things is it has to be unique. Now, I take that as well from a personal point of view. To live a remarkable life, it then means I also need to live a life that's unique. And it's so easy for us, I think, in today's world to want to find idols and then live our lives exactly the way they live it. And there's nothing unique about that, because if you're doing something somebody else is doing, that's no longer really unique. I think what's important is, if you want to live a really good life, what I've gotten from this book, from a philosophical point of view, is live a unique one. Try to understand more about you and understand the values that you have, and then take those values and try to live a life that's unique to you. You know, don't try to follow the crowd. Don't try to do what everyone else is doing. Try to be comfortable being you and doing you. You know, so to me, I take more from it than just what I can do with my online course. It just makes me think, what kind of unique story do I want to write? What kind of unique story do I want to live?
Yeah, for sure. And for me, I tie this back because we always joke about it with the team, is I love Hail Marys. And I'm a big believer that, you know, we've spoken about in other episodes, the 80-20 rule and the 90-10 rule, that a lot of the great outcomes that happen come from a few very specific moves. And I think what this book really highlights is that concept. It builds on things like the 80-20 rule, things like, you know, other books, other episodes that we've discussed, like So Good They Can't Ignore You, the 4-Hour Work Week, where For me, this is really a book that will help you further your journey on exploring the boundaries of your potential and playing around with that, being creative with it, and specifically defining your strengths and your value proposition that you can then offer out there into the world. And it gives you a little bit of a handbook to allow you to do that a little bit better potentially.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. It's a book that will help you push the boundaries and help you to not play it safe. It will give you many compelling arguments to help you break out of the mold and get uncomfortable and do things you would have never done before. So there you go. Hope you guys enjoy this book. Hope you get the book because I think it's a fantastic one, and hope you all have enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Thanks for joining us for The Purple Cow with Seth Godin, with Vinh and Ali. Seth Godin not being here. But look, we just want to say thank you to all the listeners. I did a social media post just a couple of days ago about 2 reviews that we got on Apple Podcasts. I think Ali shared with me. We really appreciate those 2 people who shared the wonderful review with us. Thank you for inspiring us and motivating us to do what we do. And we really appreciate each and every listener. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you in the next podcast. Bye for now.